The topic of today's discussion is economic growth, one of the most intriguing and the most interesting topic in the world of macroeconomics. Economic growth is a much deeper subject, and as a result, I'll try to introduce you to some concepts, but it will not be possible to get into much details in this particular lecture or in the following lecture. One of the intriguing questions that economists have been asking, why certain countries are so rich and why certain countries are so poor. And if you look at the history, United States started off very modestly, but today, in terms of total GDP, we are the largest in the whole world, and also in terms of per capita GDP, we are among the top 7 countries in this world. At the same time, countries like India and China, who were relatively richer countries, but today we count them as middle income or low income countries. To understand the idea behind economic growth, I would like to take you back to the concept of per capita GDP and the economic or GDP growth rate. Remember, GDP growth rate or economic growth is nothing but the percentage change in GDP over time. So this particular table shows the variety of growth experiences for list of countries that include Japan, Brazil, China, India, United Kingdom, United States, Pakistan. It gives the period under which we are considering. We are giving real GDP per person in the beginning of the period. I'm giving real GDP per person at the end of the period. Now if we see the period all ends in 2006, the start of the period does vary, and also average growth per year during this time period. So what's the average growth rate these countries grew? Let's take the United States. So United States between 1870 and 2006, it started off in 1870 with a per capita real GDP with $3,752, and it ended up with 44,260 real GDP per person in 2006 with an average growth rate of 1.83% per year, which means that on an average between 1870 to 2006, US grew at a rate of 1.83%, which means if you have $100, the next year it will become $101.83 and so forth. At the same time, let's look at countries like United Kingdom. Same time period, 1870 to 2006, it started off with a real per capita GDP of $4,502 in 1870, but in 2006 it started off with $35,580, and it grew at a rate of 1.53% per year. Here's the interesting fact. Though United Kingdom had higher per capita GDP than the United States in 1870, today we have much higher per capita GDP than the United Kingdom, and all is accounted by this differences in growth rate of 0.3% per year by the United States and the United Kingdom. Same we can do, for example, countries like India or Pakistan, or countries like Canada. Even Canadians in 1870 had per capita GDP of $2,224, which grew to $34,610 in 2006 with a growth rate of 2.04%. So it seems that this growth rate does matter over time, and also countries might start off slow, but over time they can do catch up. So that was the case with the United States and the United Kingdom. So I'd like to take you to much details into this, the experiences of economic growth. First important point, the period of rapid economic growth from 1870 onward is known as modern economic growth. So it is a relatively newer phenomenon. Prior to that we grew, but the rapid and sustained economic growth is a relatively recent experience for the human race. And here's the interesting fact. Before the last 2 centuries, the average person's standard of living has not changed much for centuries. So we pretty much lived a life that our great 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 ancestors lived till the beginning of the 19th century. Things started change only by the end of the 19th century, and 20th century and the 21st century we are seeing a rapid increase in the economic growth and our standard of living. Also, another important thing I would like to focus on, that small growth each year can add up over time, and that's called power of compounding. So even a small growth can add up over time. We saw how there was a 0.3% gap in the growth rate of the United States and the United Kingdom that led to a huge gap in growth rate over a period of 136 years. And also finally, countries in initial stage of development grows faster than later stage of development. Now it makes sense, because if you go from 1 to 2, that's 100% growth. But if you go from 2 to 3, that's 50% growth. Same does stand for your exams. Suppose you get 50 out of 100 in your first exam, and it goes from 50 to 75 in the next exam, that's a 50% growth. On the other hand, if you go from 60 to 85, that's less than 50% growth rate. Next, I'd like to focus on the power of sustained economic growth, or the power of compounding. And here's the story. Small change in the growth rate, when sustained and compounded over long periods of time, make an enormous difference in the standard of living. And this is achieved through compound growth rate. What is compound growth rate? The rate of growth when multiplied by a base that includes the past growth rate. So basically I'm saying, if you are putting your money, say at 10% interest rate in a bank account, say you put $100, in 1 year it will be $110. Next year you earn interest on $110, so your $110 become $121, and so forth. And to calculate GDP growth rate, we are going to use this growth rate formula, or it is also called compounding formula. Is the GDP at the start date times 1 plus growth rate of GDP to the power number of years is equal to GDP at end date. And it will become clearer if we do an example. Let's assume that your great-great-grandparents saved $100 in a bank for 100 years at 10% interest rate per year compounded annually. Please find the value of $100 in 100 years. So let's take this a simple case. Let's assume an imaginary world where you just come to know that there's a bank account in your name where your great-great-grandparents deposit $100, and for some reason they were able to get an interest rate of 10% per year. So question is how much that would be. So value of $100 in 100 years, we can use the compounding formula. So we started off at $100, then we multiplied by 1 plus the growth rate. Growth rate is 10%, which means 10 over 100, and we multiply by number of years to the power 100, which equals 100 times 1 plus 0.1 to the power 100 equal to 100 times 1.1 to the power 100. And what do you think what the figure would be? So let me write it down. You can always make this calculation in a calculator, but let me write it down here. Is dollar and that's the power of compounding. So your $100 that were deposited 100 years back at 10% interest rate would be worth more than $1.3 million. So you wish your great-great-grandparents deposited $100 in your name. And that's what exactly happens with economic growth. We are started off small, but a sustained but slow economic growth can add up over time and we can become extremely rich. That happened with most of the developed countries or high income countries in this world, and that's only happened because of power of compounding.